Today on the channel, we're going to talk about the most popular radiation detectors for uranium prospecting between 1949 and about 1957. As we all know, the uranium boom era was home to a whole bunch of different type of detectors that were used for just normal weekend warrior prospecting. Your average husband who would work 9 to 5 throughout the whole work week and was just wanting to strike it rich would see ads like this. This is one from the Saturday Evening Post from Dateline July 16th, 1955. And look what it reads. Your chance of a lifetime to discover a fortune. It's exciting, it's adventurous. Wherever you go, anytime, with a super sensitive Ltronics Geiger or scintillation detector. You would see these for Ltronics, you'd see them for Detectron, you would see these advertisements for precision radiation instruments, and even in some cases you would see underappreciated Babel counter, which we're going to get into towards the end. So let's go ahead and look at these detectors. We'll put this aside for a minute. So we'll start with the Geiger counters. And I would say the most popular Geiger counter used for prospecting of the time was the Detectron DG7. And that is the one we've got right here. It's just a basic Geiger counter. It reads in millirentgens per hour. It's got a range selector switch of 0.2 to 20. It has a count light that flashes, kind of like the one over here that you see flashing with the DG2. So anytime you come close to any sort of radiological emitting source, uranium, thorium, or anything of the like, while you're out there prospecting, the light will blink, the meter will register, and if you have headphones, you can connect the headphones and you can hear the classic clicking of the Geiger counter. The Detectron DG7 used a standard 1B85 tube. The 1B85 was an extremely sensitive Geiger tube. It was probably about, I don't know, maybe about 3 or possibly even 4 times as sensitive as the later civil defense CDV 700 tubes, which I believe was the 6993 tube by Victorine. The problem with the 1B85s and its bismuth cousins was the fact that they had a tendency to implode. There was no reinforcing design to the actual tube itself. And even slight atmospheric disturbances, like slamming a door too hard in a room, could literally cause the tube itself just to crumple, rendering it absolutely useless. Or let's say you threw this on a Jeep or in your car, you're driving around trying to find a good place to do some uranium prospecting. You close the car door too hard, boop, you basically collapsed your 1B85 tube. I think probably around 1956 or 57, they did start introducing a reinforced version of the 1B85, but they did have some reinforcements on it to keep the incident rate of collapse from happening. But prior to that, most people would do is they'd buy extra tubes and they'd keep them with them. And companies like the Uranium Engineering Company that manufactured the Babel counter, which we'll get into in a minute, they would oftentimes come with 2, possibly even 3 extra tubes just in case that would happen. The Detectron DG7 was a really good unit, but the problem is they had shortcomings, just like any Geiger counter. So if you had a very slight increase in radiological emissions from a deep source, these might overlook it. And we're going to kind of get into that issue or how they remedied it with the scintillation detectors here in just a second. So, other than the DG7, what other detector was extremely common in the Geiger tube format other than this one? So let's put this aside. And that comes with the Precision Radiation Instruments model 107B. Okay, there's obviously a whole bunch of different variants of this model as well that didn't come with an additional probe. The probe was actually built into the box, and Detectron had the same sort of setup with some of their DG2 or probeless DG7 models. These came with a glass tube made by Raytheon, and the part number escapes me right now. These were probably, I'd probably put these on par with that Victorine 6993 tube that we discussed earlier. This was absolutely not even close to as sensitive as the 1B85s, but they worked, and they were common. And I will say, construction-wise, the precision radiation instruments models, regardless of it being a scintillation detector, a Geiger counter, or what have you, the construction in these things were actually better. Even today, getting these older models, it doesn't take much to get these things running. Unlike the Detectrons, which have a problem with their high voltage choke, I've never run across a shorted out choke in these. These really are strong and well-made units. I guess kind of like all these old detectors, the only thing that really you have to worry about is replacing a couple of leaky capacitors and devising an upgraded power supply, which is actually quite simple. This detector is almost identical in settings as the Detectron. This has a ×1 to a ×100 scale. It's got a section for a headphone set, and it has the blinking light just like the others. So there's not much more to say about this one. I believe these use the exact same battery complement as the Detectron DG7. All right, so the next one is a personal favorite. And like I said, I think this thing is underappreciated. This is the Babel counter. And these started around 1948, 1949. And I really like these things. I like the leather handles on them. I like the polished brass control covers, polished brass probe up in the front. It's got chains holding on these different covers and different things. I like the switches. I like the layout of the whole entire thing. The other interesting component about this is, with a little bit of math, to a crude degree, you could determine the equivalent uranium content of the ore that you have just located. So it's a pretty well thought out model. The other thing is it has an amplified speaker, so you don't need to have headphones, although you can use headphones if you want. It's pretty loud. You could walk around outside and this thing will be clicking away, and you'll be able to hear any increase in click rate, which could indicate you're kind of close to a uranium or thorium ore deposit. So let's see. It kind of still has the same sort of instrumentation and range selector switch. They just have different names for them. They have a quick read. You can zero this thing out pretty quick. Time constants. Let's see. You can zero it. You got easy calibration right here. You don't have to take caps off and things along those lines. The other thing that's kind of nice about the front is you can detach, open this up a little bit, you can detach the actual probe, put a long tether on it, and drop these things down into mining drill holes to test for radiation emanations from the depth of the earth to see if there's any uranium veins way down in there. So that's also kind of a nice addition. You can switch between having the long cord, something to do with dealing with the high impedance, high voltage that usually runs these tubes. So you just basically switch this from long to short. It's probably just a difference of a series of resistors that are going between the two settings. So let's see. Can't see this one. No, the other switch here, you can't really see it. It's just an on-off switch for the speaker. So you can switch between having headphones or the actual amplified speaker on the outside. These are great units. They restore real nice. Getting these things to run with aftermarket batteries is pretty simple. In fact, you don't even have to use aftermarket batteries. You could even use boost boards and run the whole thing off of that. The only constant type of battery that you can't get away from is the D-cell batteries. The D-cells run the filaments in pretty much all of these detectors and scintillation detectors. All right, so there's the Babel counter. And if you ever see one of these things for sale, I would just snag it. I think their time is going to be coming up here pretty soon as far as discovery and people wanting these things on their shelf for, you know, just to show off. All right, so those are the Geiger counters. What were the most famous scintillation detectors? Well, I'm going to show you this one first because even though it's not super famous, it is what you saw in the advertisement earlier today. This, let's see, well, I'll set it like this, I guess. That is the Electronics model. There we go. That is the Electronics model that we were showing in the Saturday Evening Post ad. This is very similar to the PRI 111s and 111Bs. It uses a classic, let's see, what was that? That was the 6199 photomultiplier tube that's up here in front. And on the front of the photomultiplier tube, it typically had a 1 by 1 inch diameter sodium iodide crystal for scintillation detection. They performed probably identical to that of the 111s and the 111Bs, but they just weren't popular. I don't know. They're a little bit bigger in size, a little not too much heavier. They did everything the same, but they just weren't as popular. But regardless, there's one for you. Now, this is absolutely by far the most famous scintillation detector that was available at the time. And this was the first generation PRI model that came out probably around 1950, and is the model 111. The 111 did not have any additional bells and whistles on it. You could not hook this thing up to any sort of graph reader or anything along those lines, but it was very sensitive. It did have the same 1 inch diameter crystal up in front, classic silver gun design. It was fairly directional, and if anybody wanted to, they could wrap the end of this with lead, just exposing the front end kind of as a collimator, and it would increase its directionability. So you could definitely point to where the radioactive source was and locate it with pretty straightforward ease. They used a host of different type of batteries, a bunch of B batteries, some D batteries, as I said before, but making these things work nowadays with boost boards, it seems to do pretty good. It doesn't take much effort to get these things operational. Again, just a few capacitors and maybe a couple of boost boards with some 9 volts, and you're back in business. Now, the other one is the 111B. This is probably the one we see most often, and this is the larger chrome model. Other than being chrome and having a couple of ports up here on top for a recorder, this is not for headphones, although you can actually hook up an aftermarket whistler where you can basically walk around kind of like a classic metal detector. It'll make that same type of metal detector noise where you get this variable tone as you're walking around, and when the tone goes higher in pitch, you're getting closer to the radioactive source. So a lot of people did opt for that later on, but again, that just meant more hardware for you to carry around, and trudging around out in the outback with something like this, plus the little whistler unit, and then all the batteries that are in these things, and then water and canteens and food and your backpack and what have you. It got kind of cumbersome. But regardless, this is by far the absolute most popular scintillation detector. I got a lot of other detectors, but they were less used, and some of them were kind of crossover detectors that were used between uranium prospecting. They were used in a scholastic environment, and sometimes they're even used by the government for radiation detection. And actually, kind of on that note, I'm not sure, I'll show you a picture here. When they were doing above ground, even below ground nuclear testing in the 1960s and early 1970s, they actually used the Model 111 or 111B to test for surface contamination, hence the picture that I'm showing you right here. So they did find their way into a lot of different environments. All right, that is it. I will leave you all with that. If you got any questions, feel free to ask. And please consider subscribing. It definitely helps the channel. See you all on the next one.